Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this roundtable discussion on the United Nations Human Rights Council. My name is Milena Stereo, and I'm the Managing Director at the Public International Law and Policy Group and the Charles R. Emmerich Jr., Calfee, Halter, and Griswold Professor of Law at Cleveland State University's Cleveland Marshall College of Law. I will be moderating today's roundtable, and I'm honored to be guiding the conversation with these experts. The Public International Law and Policy Group is a global pro bono law firm providing free legal assistance to parties involved in peace negotiations, drafting post-conflict constitutions, war crimes prosecution, transitional justice, and human rights documentation. In the past months, our team has been fostering the development of a thought leadership initiative. This initiative focuses on a range of topics from prominent international law issues to pressing global conflicts. Through organizing monthly roundtables, our aim is to share expertise and reflections from our work on peace negotiations, post-conflict constitution drafting, and war crimes prosecution. In today's thought leadership event, we will be diving into the United Nations Human Rights Council and the personal experiences that today's panelists have had when engaging with this human rights body. The United Nations Human Rights Council is an intergovernmental body within the United Nations human rights system. It is made up of 47 states, which are tasked with the promotion and protection of human rights globally. The 47 seats are elected through a direct and secret ballot and are based on equitable geographical distribution. The Human Rights Council convenes in several regular sessions during the year and special sessions on urgent topics. Today's discussion comes in light of the convening of the regular session of the UN Human Rights Council on September 13th. Each of our panelists have previously served at the Human Rights Council and hence have personal knowledge of the functioning of this body. The roundtable will be 60 minutes long, and I promise you we will end on time. Our esteemed panelists include Ambassador Filoreta Kodra, Ambassador Keith Harper, Ambassador Zorica Marić-Đorđević, Ambassador Amanda Ellis, and Ambassador Yvette Stevens. Today's event will be recorded and subsequently posted on our website. We ask that you please submit any questions you may have for our speakers using the Q&A function, and we will do our best to answer your questions at the end or throughout this event. Now, please allow me to introduce our 5 ambassadors. First, we have Her Excellency Ambassador Yvette Stevens, currently an executive in residence at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Ambassador Stevens has had a broad and long career in the UN and as ambassador of Sierra Leone to the United Nations in Geneva, representing her country at the Human Rights Council from 2013 to 2018. Most recently, from 2019 to 2020, Ambassador Stevens was chair rapporteur of the Human Rights Council Expert Group on Prevention. We also welcome Her Excellency, Ambassador Filoreta Kodra, who was permanent representative of Albania to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva between 2012 and 2018. Ambassador Kodra has held several positions at the UN office, including Vice President of the Human Rights Council for 2015, member of Consultative Group of Human Rights Council for 2016, and member of the Working Group on Complaints Procedures for the year 2017. Next, we have Her Excellency Ambassador Zorica Marić-Đorđević, former head of the Permanent Mission of Montenegro to the World Trade Organization and special representative of Montenegro to the UN Human Rights Council between 2013 and 2015. Currently, Ambassador Marić-Đorđević is a senior peace fellow at the Public International Law and Policy Group. Next, we have His Excellency Ambassador Keith M. Harper, partner at Jenner & Block, and former United States ambassador and permanent representative to the UN Human Rights Council from 2014 to 2017. Before that, Ambassador Harper served as commissioner on the President's Commission on White House Fellows. Last, but by no means the least, we welcome Her Excellency Ambassador Amanda Ellis, who currently serves as Executive Director Asia Pacific for the Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation and Senior Director, Global Partnerships and Networks for the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University. She is co-chair of the We Empower UN SDG Challenge, launched by the UN Secretary General, the President of the World Bank, and the Council of Women World Leaders in 2018 to promote inclusive entrepreneurship. Previously, she was New Zealand's head of mission and ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva. For full speaker biographies, please visit the Public International Law and Policy Group website. Welcome everyone, and thank you for agreeing to participate in today's panel. I would like to begin this discussion with a general question to Ambassador Ellis. Could you please walk us through the daily work of the Council? What did your job entail leading New Zealand's mission to the UN Human Rights Council? And what do you consider your country's most important contribution at the time?
Well, thank you, Milena, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you and with former colleagues who are still wonderful friends. New Zealand was a founding member of the Council, and during my time, all 193 United Nations members were part of the Council. Now, the daily work very much depends on if your country is one of the 47 member states, whether it's a regular, emergency, or thematic session, and the importance conferred by capital on the issue at hand, and of course, other responsibilities of the mission. So, for example, New Zealand works very hard to bring in the voices of small island states. So I guess I would sum it up with consultation as the most important dimension, both with colleagues and also with capital. Now, in terms of my role, during my time, it was a very special moment for New Zealand. We were running for a seat on the United Nations Security Council, which is something we do once in a generation. So I wore a number of hats. I was also our Prime Minister's special envoy to Francophone Africa and to French-speaking countries like Lebanon, for example, and was the inaugural ambassador for women and girls, which is an issue very dear to my heart. So there was a lot for us to learn, particularly from our African colleagues. And I was involved very actively once a month working with the AU ambassador and all of my African colleagues to look at the peace and security issues facing them and to make sure that we were able to really come up to speed as we prepared for our council seat. And we did get on the council. So 2015 was a particularly interesting year, of course, very intense with the negotiations for the Sustainable Development Goals. And that was another element, I think, of importance to make sure that human rights issues were included as we negotiated the first ever Global Development Agenda. And finally, most proud of, well, I think probably my colleagues would say New Zealand should be most proud of the UN handbook that we publish every year and which is just such a useful resource. I would personally say the work that we did on Myanmar, Syria, especially getting Syrian women a seat at the table, and given New Zealand was the first country where women won the right to vote back in 1893, issues of gender equality have always been crucial. So looking at my colleagues here, the work that we did together as women ambassadors to ensure that, for example, with Ambassador Stevens, bring back our girls when Boko Haram kidnapped girls in northern Nigeria. And looking also at Ambassador Harper, who did some fabulous work on Indigenous issues. We were delighted to be part of that too. So for me, just the opportunity to work with colleagues to really make a positive difference was the achievement that I'm most proud of.
Thank you. Now, we're going to move on to a slightly different topic. I would like to talk about the Council's role in addressing country-specific types of cases. So right now we have the ongoing human rights violations in Belarus following the presidential election in the summer of 2020, the ongoing crisis in Myanmar and Syria, as well as the recent developments in Afghanistan, among many other situations on the Council's agenda. Ambassador Kodra, could you briefly discuss the Council's role in practice in addressing some of these country-specific types of cases?
Thank you, Milena, for having me, first of all, for creating the possibility to meet with all these my friends. I will enter into the substance of your question. Human Rights Council addresses the human rights situation in specific countries through several mechanisms. The first one is the item 4, that is an item in the working program of the human rights, that is human rights situation that require council attention. Then there are special procedures such as thematic or country mandates, commission of inquiry, and in specific cases, the special sessions of Human Rights Council. All these instruments mainly serve to evaluate and propose measures to improve the situation. As we all know, Human Rights Council is an institution based on the application of soft law to promote and improve human rights situation. But the reality on the ground, as in the past and currently, with all the work of the Human Rights Council, shows that the results achieved leave much to be desired. For example, the mandate of Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Belarus was established in 2012. This mandate has been extended for more than 6 times, and it is still in place. The mandate on the situation of human rights in Central African Republic is established in 2013, still in place. The mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar has been established in 1992, and in 2021 is still in place. Or the mandate of Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Syrian Arab Republic established in 2011, and it has been also a commission of inquiry in this country. And now the mandate of the commission of Special Rapporteur will begin as soon as the mandate of commission of inquiry ends. So the use of different instruments is based on the country situation. The effectiveness of these instruments depends on the cooperation of each country under consideration. There have been cases where individual countries have refused to cooperate, or have not accepted the field visit of the mandate holders, or have not agreed with findings, which means that the involvement of Human Rights Council has had little or no impact in the ground. Having in mind these facts and experiences, a new Human Rights Council approach is required. Human Rights Council should be oriented towards more preventive instruments, helping countries to use negotiations before the crisis erupts. This approach needs to be taken also in light of Secretary General's priority objective of conflict prevention and how it can be positioned in the implementation process of the resolution on sustaining peace and the Agenda 2030.
Thank you.
I would like to mention again that what has been the contribution of Albania. In 2017, with the initiative of Switzerland and Germany, it was created the caucus for putting, based on the appeal launched by Switzerland of 13th June, to put human rights at the heart of conflict prevention. And this has been, Albania has been among the member countries of this caucus. Maybe we will have the opportunity to continue this after the others will take their floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. And I'm sure we will have time to return to some of these themes. Now, another situation about which there has been a lot of concern lately is the crisis in the Tigray region in Ethiopia. The Human Rights Council issued a resolution in July calling for the withdrawal of Eritrean troops from Tigray. The High Commissioner is expected to give an oral update during a so-called enhanced interactive dialogue to the Human Rights Council at the 47th session starting next week. Ambassador Maric, what are the benefits of oral updates and interactive dialogues for the Council in approaching these fast-moving human rights issues, and what next procedural steps might the Council take on a situation like this one?
Thank you for that question, Milena. And since I'm taking floor for the first time, thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work of PLPG in supporting democracy and peace building across the world. I'm so happy to see all my former colleagues and great friends. Let me just first say that as Africa's second most populous country with 110 million people, Ethiopia is pivotal to stability in the Horn of Africa. The 2018 rapprochement of Ethiopia and Eritrea gave new hope for stability and peace in the Horn of Africa. Unfortunately, the conflict in Ethiopia's north region, Tigray, which broke in November 2020, has exacerbated the security and humanitarian crisis that threatened hundreds of thousands of lives and overall regional security. You're right, in a resolution on the situation of human rights in Tigray region of Ethiopia, the Council expressed grave concern at the reports of serious human rights violations and abuses and violations of international humanitarian law and international refugee law, and called for the swift and verifiable withdrawal of Eritrean troops from Tigray. The Council also requested the High Commissioner to present an oral update to the Human Rights Council at its 48th session, which is this September regular session, on enhanced interactive dialogue, and also on its 49th session, during an interactive discussion on the situation of human rights in Tigray. And most importantly, the High Commissioner will present evaluation of the progress and challenges in the context of the joint investigation of the Office of the High Commissioner and Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. It's worthwhile mentioning that one party involved in the conflict, Eritrea, is currently a member of the Human Rights Council and indeed voted against this resolution. From the procedural point of view, this resolution was approved as agenda item 2, which is sometimes used as a political compromise to deal with country-specific situation outside of item 4 and 10. Item 2 is open through the duration of the session for the intervention of the member states and the stakeholders. As you mentioned, there will be an enhanced interactive dialogue based on High Commissioner report, followed up by the interventions from member states, civil society organizations, international organizations as well. Keeping in mind the complexity of the situation in Ethiopia, the second part might provide, as we called it, clustered interactive dialogue with the reports of, for example, UN High Commissioner for Refugees and or Special Rapporteur for Eritrea. All of this will help to build a narrative and political pressure towards the following steps. And the following steps will really depend on the report of the High Commissioner and the findings, concrete results of this joint investigation of the High Commissioner and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission based on the mandate set up during the March session, and input from the member states. One option is that Human Rights Council add Ethiopia, Tigray, to its formal agenda 4 and request regular briefings from the High Commissioner on the situation. However, High Commissioner Bachelet already referred to possible war crimes, and the office stated that the investigation covered human rights violation and abuses in the context of Tigray conflict. In the meantime, we heard also evaluation of the UN Secretary General that the military confrontation has escalated and that Ethiopian government has not responded positively to proposals for negotiations. So besides UN figures show staggering deterioration of the humanitarian situation. Over 400,000 people in Tigray region are at the risk of starving and 5 million are undernourished. The famine this time has nothing to do with drought or failed harvests. This famine is caused entirely by war. And according to the UN, the parties to the conflict are deliberately blocking humanitarian aid. So I would expect Human Rights Council to step up to prevent further wide-scale human sufferings. There are enough early warning signs of a deteriorating human rights situation and a significantly heightened risk of future violations in Ethiopia. High Commissioner in my view, should be able to address the options for advancing accountability and uphold the credibility of Human Rights Council. Something similar to the case of Sri Lanka and the landmark resolution that was adopted in 2014 and again in March 2021. New accountability process for the country to collect, analyze, and preserve evidence of international crimes committed for use in the future prosecution might be established within the framework of dedicated new capacity within the Office of UN High Commission. And of course, Security Council should take additional steps to address the current risk of conflict-induced famine based on the UN Resolution 2417 from 2018. To conclude, the UN, the international community and its partners must now step up the coordinated response as the gravity of the situation, in my view, exceeds the capacity of the Human Rights Council.
Thank you for those comments. And let me actually take the opportunity now to actually take one of the questions that just came in from one of our audience members. And it is the following. Do you think it is in the best interest of human rights and the human rights bodies, the protection of human rights, if you will, on a theoretical level, as well as the United Nations, to ban countries which systematically violate human rights from the Council? What do you do if you have the situation where one of the countries where the human rights are occurring is actually on the Council? It seems to me like that would be a difficult situation to address. So do you think it's better to have some list of countries that, because of things that are happening internally, do not get a seat until the situation improves? Or do you think that it's actually better to engage in a dialogue with the countries that violate human rights, in the hope that being on the Human Rights Council, having to have this dialogue will actually possibly result in change? I know that's a loaded question, difficult question to answer, but I wonder if one of our panelists would like to take this one on.
Let me try just to quickly address one of the elements of comprehensive reform efforts. Many member states in recent years were calling for, and this is a growing phenomenon of clean slate elections, in which the number of candidate states presents from the given region equals the number of available seats for the region. So the resulting non-competitive elections have drawn severe criticism for allowing states elections with dubious or repressive human rights records. For example, currently, 30 of 47 council members in 2020-2021 are currently ranked as a not free or partly free in the Freedom House ranking. So there must be a kind of approach when we talk about reform of the Human Rights Council also to this stricter membership criteria.
Yeah, I would just add to that, look, I believe strongly, and first, this is the first time talking, let me say thank you for the invitation. And I especially appreciate you bringing us together with my esteemed colleagues. And I will tell you, these four ambassadors, certainly each and every one of them left their mark in Geneva in significant ways. And everybody involved in human rights owes them a debt of gratitude on so many different issues. But look, I think the council does undermine, the legitimacy of the council and the credibility of the council, and what it does is undermined by rights abusing states. Burundi, when it was on the council seeking to block its resolutions. I think if, say, Syria or North Korea were on the council, these would be not good for its own legitimacy. Having said that, and maybe one rule is if you are under a Chapter 4 resolution, you are then barred from being on the Human Rights Council, because you have to have some metric. Otherwise, it's just going to be highly political on who becomes on the list and who doesn't. And so that's what we've got to think about, is not whether or not it's a good idea, but how do you actually implement it in a political body like the United Nations?
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this important question? And if not, we will move on and can come back to it. But I would like to give you the opportunity to weigh in. Ambassador Kodra. You are still on mute, I believe. There you go.
The shortest way is to say that we need to ban those countries from the Council because, of course, there is a problem. If there are problems within the country, how this country will represent and deal with other countries' problems on human rights. I would say that, again, it's better to try to put some measurements other than ban those countries. So this might be the best way.
Because I think the problem will come when people ask, what are the criteria for banning countries? Because, you know, it's very politicized in the Human Rights Council. And when you say to one particular country that they say, well, there are other countries that are not brought under agenda item 4 that we would think should also be banned. So that would be the problem. How do you determine which countries to ban? And I think that's a problem which would need to be tackled.
Final word, I agree that I think it's important to have some kind of criteria, but echoing the other comments, it is so important to have everybody at the table and to be able to engage. So yeah, I actually really like Ambassador Harper's suggestion, but also take into account highly politicized, so very difficult as to who is actually chapter 4.
Yes. Thank you. These are excellent answers. And I certainly agree with much of what what all of you have already stated. I would like to also take the opportunity to take another audience question because we've already touched upon this briefly. We talked about the Council's role in addressing country-specific situations. One of the questions that came in has to do with the situation in Afghanistan, and in particular, the Taliban regime that just came into power in Afghanistan. And the question says, is there anything that the UN, and let's actually not focus on the UN, let's focus on the Human Rights Council, but is there anything that the UN Human Rights Council is doing or can do to address, you know, I don't want to say ongoing, but, you know, sort of possibly future violations that might take place by the Taliban regime? And this is why this situation is so difficult, because we have evidence of what the Taliban regime had done in the past. We don't actually know what they're going to do now. So is there something that the Council could do in a situation like that?
Well, let me just start. Well, first of all, you know, the Council has taken action. I thought that the action taken in their session was not as effective as it should have been and could have been. Yes, we don't know what violations, all the nature and scope of the violations that the Taliban will ultimately perform, but we do know that their ideology is one that, for example, in the space regarding women's rights and girls' rights, we know that they are going to be highly violative of their rights. And so I think that this is actually an opportunity for the Council to act with force regarding drawing lines of what would be completely unacceptable. You know, we now have a generation of women and girls that have grown up in a freer Afghanistan. And so we are condemning them to going back to a situation that I think the international community should view as completely intolerable. And so I hope that they do take more steady action and direct, for example, the High Commissioner, the Office of the High Commissioner, to outline with specificity the kinds of things that would be seen as highly problematic by the international community. I don't think it is something in and of itself standing alone, but I think combined with bilateral engagement and engagement with regional organizations, we can pressure them to do the right thing, at least to a certain degree.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this? If not, there's another. Go ahead, Ambassador Ellis.
I was just going to say briefly that I was speaking to a New Zealand colleague on Zoom last night who's in the UN compound in Kabul, and just the same issue with regards to humanitarian assistance that we faced when I was co-chair for humanitarian access into Syria on the Security Council, is there's this divide. There's such a huge need in Afghanistan for assistance and for humanitarian aid. But if the regime in place is preventing it from getting to everybody and is going to be very selective about it, and the comment about women and girls is so well made, there's a real tension. So this is another issue, I think, which is really the architecture across the UN system. It's not just the Human Rights Council, but it's also thinking about the interplay of all the UN bodies and how aid is actually distributed on the ground in these critical conditions and what preconditions there are.
Thank you. There's actually another country-specific question that just came in, and to our audience members, as you can see, I'm really trying to work in your questions as we go, because I do think it makes for a more interesting conversation. And that question has to do with Cuba. And the question is, do you believe that there's any possibility that the issue, especially Cuba being an almost quote unquote permanent member of the Human Rights Council, could be addressed at least with a joint declaration of democratic countries? Any advice for Latin American NGOs working on this issue on how to push democratic countries to raise their voice on it? Any thoughts about the continuous impunity that Cuba enjoys within the council? So again, this is this is a very difficult and interesting question. But is it your would you agree with that Cuba sort of seems to enjoy impunity within the council, and how do you deal with that kind of a situation? Whatever thoughts on this you're at liberty to share.
Well, silence.
And if not, we can certainly move on.
Well, I mean, I feel like I don't want to jump in too much, but I mean, I certainly have views on Cuba. I was a big supporter of President Obama's rapprochement with Cuba, because I don't think that failed policy for 5 decades should be continued. Having said that, we shouldn't turn a blind eye to Cuba's human rights violations. But frankly, I do think this is an area where Cuba has to be held accountable by their regional neighbors in Latin America. I think the dynamic of the United States taking the lead on it is just not one in which, given the history, is going to be helpful. Or even the West, frankly. I think that it really is something that should be coming from the global South. I think there is impunity of Cuba, and there shouldn't be impunity of Cuba. But unfortunately, I think it's going to have to come from the regional neighbors.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on Cuba, or we will move on? Okay.
I can add, if possible, well, from my experience working at the Human Rights Council, I can confirm that Cuba is a very strong, proactive member of the Human Rights Council. Multilateral platform is exactly the venue that they use to promote their values, to build the alliances. They know procedures very well. They have a very skilled diplomats, and they use Human Rights Council through different mechanisms as a very strong platform. So addressing some of the violations, domestic violations of human rights in Cuba through those platforms would be very important, and to engage Cuba in addressing those issues would be extremely important, and would have an impact on their diplomatic activities.
Great, thank you. There's another question, another country-specific situation, and then I promise we will move on. But I would particularly love to hear from Ambassador Kodra and perhaps Mari Djordjevic as well, because this comes from Europe, and the question has to do with Hungary and Poland, where we've seen basically the government almost taking control of the courts and the press. You know, we have seen these repressive governments come into power and really undo a lot of the democratic reforms that had been put in place post Cold War. Ambassador Kodra, let me start with you. Can the UN Human Rights Council do something about these kinds of situations?
Thank you, Milena. It is true that there are countries that are taking some extreme positions in Europe. And as far as I know, European Union, because both countries that you mentioned are members of the European Union, and European Union is now discussing and taking care of some measures against these countries. What human rights councils should do? I would say that it is better that the human rights, as I said before, to take care more on the prevention. And the corruption has become a real threat for human rights all over the world. And also in these countries, with the information that we have, the corruption is a problem. So maybe this is a field to be explored by the Human Rights Council to take some steps ahead.
Thank you, Milena, for that question. Indeed, I think the last couple of years have shown that fragility and sliding back in democracy is a big challenge across the world. So I would say that Human Rights Council can do two things. They can step up screening of those countries through the Universal Periodic Review and through the 6 months reporting on the recommendations and requests put in reviewing these Universal Periodic Reviews of those countries, Poland, Hungary, and other countries where we see that democracy is sliding back. I think that European Union, which is very strong, with its very strong presence in the Human Rights Council, would be expected to really step up in addressing these issues in their own club. And most importantly, I think that Human Rights Council should empower civil society's engagement in Human Rights Council, because civil society is particularly attacked in those two countries. So I would say there are mechanisms, but at the same time, I think that could be used. But at the same time, I think it's member states, 47 countries that could build the alliance and address those questions during the regular sessions of the Human Rights Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, my next question is for Ambassador Stevens. Ambassador Stevens, with the adoption of Resolution 3818, you were appointed as chair rapporteur for the experts group on prevention of human rights violations. What was the goal of the resolution and how did it contribute to the overall mission of the Human Rights Council?
Thank you for that question. And let me also say how pleased I am to be here, especially to speak on prevention, which was something I spent a lot of time in whilst at the Human Rights Council. In 2016, a core group of countries, Switzerland, Norway, Colombia, and Sierra Leone, felt the need for the Human Rights Council to pay greater attention to primary prevention. That is that I think Filoretta has mentioned it quite clearly, because we felt that most of the attention of the Human Rights Council was after everything had gone wrong, when the genie is out of the bottle, if you say, and trying to get it back is not so easy. So we felt that maybe consistent with paragraph 5F, of the Human Rights Council Resolution 60/251, which called on the Human Rights Council to contribute through dialogue and cooperation towards the prevention of human rights violations and to respond promptly to human rights emergencies. So for 2 years, we did joint statements on that, on the need for the Human Rights Council itself to be more involved in prevention. And then in 2018, we came up with Resolution 3818. This was just before I left the council and before I left my job as ambassador. Basically, the resolution called for three main things, if I should summarize it. First is to look at how the Human Rights Council and its mechanisms could enhance their role in preventing human rights violations in the first place. And how can the Human Rights Council cooperate with other UN entities to address prevention? And then it's also called on the group of experts that were nominated for this function through consultations to find out how the Human Rights Council can take early action when the warning signals on human rights deteriorations occur. So this was basically what the resolution was about. We had, as a group, as the group of four, were we four or three? Three, old age. we looked at, we had consultations and we held 2 seminars and we came out with a report. And the report was presented to the council in March last year. Basically, it made some recommendations based on the consultations. One is that the Human Rights Council should pay more attention to technical assistance and capacity building, because there are so many recommendations that come to countries, and some countries, it's not because they are rejecting this recommendation, but they do not have the means to implement it. And what we felt was that rather than the Human Rights Council wait until they come to the next universal periodic review and say, by the way, we made this recommendation, you haven't implemented it, to try to dig deeper into why some of these accepted recommendations are not being implemented, and to see what could be done to assist countries who need the assistance, by the way, because not all countries need it. A country like mine, I did it. I got an example when we finished the universal periodic review. I wrote to OHCHR to say, could you assist us? I never got any reply. So basically, the whole recommendation was geared towards paying greater attention, not only by OHCHR, but also other UN entities, or indeed other organizations, other people that could assist countries in implementing these recommendations and in assisting countries in meeting their human rights obligations. The second one was, the second big recommendation was that how could we, was to request the OHCHR to put mechanisms in place to analyze early warning signals. The information comes from all sources, NGOs, everybody, they send it. But the Human Rights Council itself does nothing about it until the situation is already erupted, and then there's a special session. The special session is the first thing that the Human Rights Council calls for. And by then, things have gone bad. And in any case, they would never succeed in having a Human Rights Council if they do not get the minimum number of votes required for members of the council to get those sessions. So basically, we were saying that the OHCHR should be empowered to analyze, to put mechanisms to really analyze this early information that is coming out, and then draw the attention of the High Commissioner. Of course, the High Commissioner should then bring it to the council, and then we should start looking at ways of engaging countries before these situations become lead to conflicts. So basically, the recommendations was that we could think about confidential sessions with member states where the human rights are getting the warning from, to engage these states, the governments concerned, to see if that could not, if action could not be taken to avoid conflict. And also to look at the whole question of goodwill missions, also to go to states to negotiate before things deteriorate. So basically, these were the main thrust. Of course, we also mentioned as our recommendations greater cooperation between the Human Rights Council and the other organs of the United Nations. People always say human rights is the third pillar of the United Nations. I said, no, it's one of the three pillars, because when you put it third, it means that it's the least important. So I always insist, one of the pillars of the United Nations. So basically, we saw the need for the Human Rights Council to work more closely with the Security Council, taboo, and the Peace Building Commission at ECOSOC. So these were the thrust of our recommendations. I presented the report to the Human Rights Council in March of last year, and just before the COVID lockdown. And it's still too early to see the impact of that, but it's moving in the right direction, because the resolution which emerged from the Human Rights Council was very much in line with the recommendations which we made. And for instance, it's called on the council, of course, on the different mechanisms of the council to pay greater attention to mainstream prevention in their work. All the special procedures to not that prevention comes as sometime at the end of whatever they're doing, but that it's mainstream into their work, into their terms of reference. It's also called on a big study by the Secretary General, not by the High Commission, but by the Secretary General, to report to the Council on how all the different bodies of the United Nations could assist in the implementation of human rights recommendations that are levied on states. And then it's also, of course, called upon the OHCHR to increase its capacity to do the analysis as we had recommended. And I think this is in the right direction. If you look at the resolution which emerged, everything is in the right direction. And we do hope that this would be, that the awareness of the greater need for prevention will make a change, an impact. And to answer another question which will come about later as to how we see a reform, for me, I would see that this prevention playing a better role in the work of the Human Rights Council could be a major reform, could be a part of the reform process, so that technical cooperation and for instance, agenda item 10 now, which is supposed to be technical cooperation, it's only looking at countries that are already, you know, that prevention is no longer a question for them. It's only used as a soft landing. Instead of agenda item 4, countries negotiate to say, provide us with technical assistance, put us on agenda item 10. So it's not really playing the role that we see it could play, where we would be assisting countries that have the will to implement human rights recommendations, but do not have the means to do so. So this is basically what our prevention work has consisted of. And we are praying that it would have a change, it would make a change in the reformed Human Rights Council work.
Thank you so much. My next question has to do with the United States. You know, I have to ask this question. This is perhaps sort of the elephant in the room for us in the United States. And this one goes to Ambassador Harper. So there's been criticism in the past about the functioning of the Human Rights Council and its membership, including criticism from the US. And in fact, as we all know, in 2018, the US withdrew from the Human Rights Council. Ambassador Harper, on the basis of your experience serving as the last US ambassador to the Human Rights Council, how do you think the council could be improved in order to avoid such criticism? And is there anything to be done about, you know, the United States? What are your thoughts on, will the United States perhaps rejoin in the near future?
Yeah, thank you for that question. First, to answer your last part, my understanding is that the Biden administration will run for a seat in WEOG this fall. And it'll be a competitive race, but I expect that the United States will prevail in getting a seat back. So on the question of whether or not we should or shouldn't be engaged at the council, I think that the record speaks for itself. Engagement wins, disengagement loses. The three criticisms of the council and why the U.S. should withdraw, I mean, there is some basis for these criticisms, but we do far better if we engage than if we don't. So what are the three criticisms? The first is that there's a hyper focus on Israel. There is a hyper focus on Israel. In fact, there's an item 7, that is only about Israel. And it's the United States position that we should not pick on any country and say, you are going to be treated differently. Now, that is not to say that any country should be free from scrutiny, because they shouldn't be. Not the United States, not Israel, not any country. But each country should have the same measuring stick. And when you separate out Israel, that's a problem. What I would say to the critics, though, is that they are wrong about whether or not we do better vis-a-vis Israel when we engage or when we're not. Because look, the heaviest medicine of the Human Rights Council is a special session. And during the 3.5 years in the Bush administration, when we weren't at the Human Rights Council, there were 6 special sessions. In the 7.5 years where you had a full-time ambassador in place, there was 1 special session on Israel. So the metrics are very clear on that point. The second issue is whether or not, and we've talked about this before, we can improve the membership of the council. Or is that a reason to say that the council doesn't have legitimacy? I think that, having rights abusing states does undermine the legitimacy, but we all should work, each country should work collectively to elect better members in New York, because that's where the elections occur. It's not a reason to depart from the council, because it's a reason to fight the good fight on the council floor. And we're still able to get resolutions on Burundi and Iran and DPRK and so many other countries where they're rights abusing states. The third criticism is often that the council doesn't solve every human rights problem. And I agree with that. It doesn't solve every human rights problem, nor is it intended to. And sort of saying any institution, we should sort of either get rid of it or we should abandon it because it doesn't solve every problem is silly. I mean, no criminal justice system around the world arrests every criminal and arrests every murderer, but we don't get rid of the criminal justice system. We figure out ways to improve the criminal justice system. And by the same token, we need to figure out ways to improve the efficacy of the Human Rights Council. Finally, I would just say the critics also ignore the fact that the Universal Periodic Review has been an incredibly effective mechanism. If you actually look at recommendations made, accepted, and implemented, it has probably changed human rights and improved human rights around the world better and more effectively than any other mechanism. So that's what I say to them is look, yes, we should work on improving the council, but your criticisms are actually highly misguided, and withdrawing from the council is ill-advised.
Thank you so much. As we're, go ahead, Ambassador Kodra.
Thank you, Milena. I would like to take over from Keith saying that the Human Rights Council doesn't solve everything. But as a member of compliant procedures, I can tell you that I have witnessed how worried and how hard have fought some state representatives during the time that I was member of this commission in order to explain to the commission the measures that the state have taken, what they have done in order to improve the things that have been complained by people. In that, I can say that the civil society has to do a better use with these special procedures of the Human Rights Council in order to move things ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. As we're nearing the end of the hour, I would like to ask one last question, and it's going to be the same question for each of the panelists, and it has to do with possible reforms to the council. What, in your opinion, should these reforms entail, and how best to achieve them? And if each of you can answer that in a minute, I would be very, very grateful. So Ambassador Maric, why don't we start with you?
Thank you very much, Milena. There has been already, of course, growing recognition that there is a need to undertake the inclusive cross-regional and structured dialogue to review how the Human Rights Council could best fulfill its mandate and purpose, as set down in General Assembly Resolution 60/251. And this includes the most recent discussions in 2017 and 18 around how the work and effectiveness of Human Rights Council might be further enhanced. The report on these efforts, streamlining and strengthening the Human Rights Council was published in 2018. It gave the list of specific areas: working methods, agenda, and the program work, effective delivery of capacity building, technical support, membership, support for domestic implementation, national implementation of international human rights obligations and commitments, and strengthening coordination and communication between Geneva and New York. So I would like just to, to refer particularly to this area. I think that there is a significant institutional confusion about the relationship between the Council and General Assembly, especially the Third Committee, responsible for social, humanitarian, and cultural affairs. Consequences of this incoherence include the tabling of repetitive and duplicative human rights resolution each year in both the Council and the Third Committee, repetitive interactive dialogue, and the implicit threat of reopening of Council annual report to the General Assembly in the Third Committee. Unfortunately, the problem here is here to stay, and improved, I think, coordination, communication between Geneva and New York could certainly elevate the situation, particularly on a prevention issue that Yvette spoke so well about. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Ellis, let me go to you next.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that I think we do need to focus on is the fact that the Council does provide an inclusive venue, and just reminding the fact that it's not only the member states that are able to speak, it's also the observer states and civil society. I think that's something that's very important to be preserved. Second, I think improving interaction between the Council and the treaty bodies. So my particular personal interest is gender equality and the empowerment of women. And we need to remember that only 10 countries out of 193 have even fully legislated for gender equality. So seeing a better interaction between CEDAW, for example, and that work and the Council, so the treaty bodies would be important. Very much support Ambassador Stevens' points about early warning and prevention and the integrated approach that needs to occur. And just a quick example, negotiations for the past 20 years in the World Trade Organization on fisheries subsidies. There's so much evidence to show that there is an integrated issue here with human rights violations, human trafficking, etc. So if we're able to better integrate the work across the UN agencies, I think that would be very important. And a final word on a topic which I think requires much more attention across the UN system as a whole, but particularly in the Council, and that is climate justice.
Thank you. Ambassador Stevens.
I think greater attention, I said that before, has to be paid on prevention. Another point that I think hampers the work of the Council is that there is this fixed agenda items, the fixed agendas of the Council, which the Council attempts to go through at each session. This leads to a lot of duplication. I think closely looking at the agenda for each of the sessions and making it current and work according to what issues need to be addressed by the Council in that particular session would make more sense to me. But basically, I would be happy if prevention gets its role according to the recommendations we made to the Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Kodra?
You're muted.
You're still on mute, yes.
Sorry. The resolution on sustaining peace highlights the contribution of the rule of law at the international and national levels, and good governance, democracy, accountable institutions, gender equality, and respect for and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. I did mention this because I am convinced, and I say that the Council of Human Rights need to find ways and means to respond and not to react after the things has happened. So this is what the work of the Council should be focused. And one way is that the prevention should be on the focus of the Human Rights Council. and for the establishing the just, peaceful, and inclusive societies, it is important, by my opinion, to find ways to fight corruption. Because as the last example that we are all witnessing is a state failure because of the corruption. So I think that this should be some of the priorities of the Human Rights Council.
Thank you. And Ambassador Harper, you get the last word on this.
I'll try to be quick. I know we're at the top of the hour here. So I would just mention three things quickly. First, I think abolishing item 7 would be important to enhance the legitimacy and the credibility of the council. Again, no country should be sort of picked on and treated differently from others. And I think that's a very important point. The second one is that countries should work together to try to ensure that that rights abusing states are left off the council, and especially ones that are under the agenda of the council's item 4 and maybe even item 2. The third is, and this is riffing a little bit off what Ambassador Stevens said, I think there's a real lack of resources in ensuring that countries that do have the political will have the necessary resources and expertise to actually implement human rights changes. I remember during our tenure, the Central African Republic had an extraordinary amount of human rights abuses in their country, and some of it was just groups fighting each other. But they simply didn't have the institutional capacity to do it differently, and they had the political will. And so, where a country has a political will, then we ought to take steps as an international community to ensure that they have the expertise and resources in order to implement the human rights and build institutional capacity so that they can become better in observing human rights.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And that's all that we have time for today. Thank you for joining us and submitting your questions, and apologies if we did not get to all of your questions. The webinar recording will be available on the PILPG website and shared with all of the attendees on Zoom through email. I would like to reiterate that this event was part of the PILPG Thought Leadership Initiative Expert Roundtable series. We organize monthly expert roundtables and share our expertise and insights on various topics of international law and international affairs. Thank you again to all our panelists for sharing their stories, and to all the attendees for contributing to this crucial discussion with all of their questions. I encourage everyone to follow this initiative, and I invite all of you to join us for our next Thought Leadership event. Thank you.